It looks like a storm is coming. Here's your look at the new Hasbro G.I. Joe classified series, Storm Shadow. This Storm Shadow figure comes ready for action, with multiple points of articulation for high posability and 9 character-inspired accessories. And with custom artwork by Yuko Shimizu, the G.I. Joe Classified Series Storm Shadow package will make a mark on shelves. First things first, we're going to go ahead and grab my tape measure. Actually, no, first things first, I'd like to thank the folks over at Hasbro that provided this sample of the Classified Series Storm Shadow that we could have a look at in this video. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to grab this tape measure of mine just to see how tall the figure stands. Storm Shadow seems to stand just a little less than actually 6 inches. 6 inches is right there, so the figures are almost closer to being about 5 3/4 of an inch tall, or he's about 14 centimeters in height. Probably many of you would likely display your Storm Shadow on the shelf blade to blade in battle with Snake Eyes. Being though a big fan of the original 80s cartoon G.I. Joe though, he never really had a feud so much with Snake Eyes, but he certainly did have a feud though with Spirit. And just to bring in Spirit so you can see the difference in height, Storm Shadow is shorter than Spirit. Another comparison we can also make as well, I'm covering the camera with my big hairy arm. Here's what he looks like next to Crocmaster. Not only is he a little leaner than Crocmaster, but he's certainly shorter as well. To the credit of Hasbro, they do pretty good with stacking these figures with tons of accessories. Not only does he come with accessories I would have expected a character like Storm Shadow to have, but he also comes with a few extra things as well. Starting things first, the figure does have one thing I've already taken the liberty of adding on to the figure's body. Anybody want to take any guesses as to what it is? Some are saying the bandolier across his shoulders. No, it's not that. Some are saying his belt. You're close. You're very, very warm. One thing the figure did come included with, let's just move his arm out of the way. He came with this little sash, a continuation of his belt. All I did was there's a hole on the back of it. There's a plug on the back of his belt. You know how it goes. We're just going to plug the two together. He actually had that as well. Felt the need to point that out just in case somebody was looking to get the figure for themselves and asked why there was a little something, there's like a little black strand. You probably even saw it at the beginning of this video when I was unpacking everything. That's where it goes, right there. The figure also comes included with part quiver, part scabbard, a 2-part. He actually has this that actually attaches onto the back. He does have the Arashikage logo there on the side, or on the front. And he does have the same matching burgundy color on the tops of his feathers, at least the feathers of his arrows. None of these are removable, by the way, but at least he does have one standalone on its own. And he does, again, have the little scabbard parts that actually fit the sword that we're about to have a look at. When you are attaching this onto Storm Shadow, there is really a specific way to do it. You can have it this way, but then the arrows would be facing the opposite way. You really would want to plug it in this way. So not only are the arrows facing the right way, but then there's also places where you can store the swords as well. It just plugs onto the back like that. As I did say, there is an extra part right here because the figure also comes included with a standalone arrow. So if you did want to have the figure displayed with bow and arrow, obviously defeating the purpose completely if all these were already molded into the quiver. But there's actually a standalone arrow, and there's a slot right at the top just behind the other arrows. That slides into place. And actually where you slide that in, even though you know right away that that's a different arrow judging by how lighter the color of the feather is, at least there is a place and they all sort of line up with one another. I like that. I think that's a nice touch. Putting the figure down here just for 1 second. We're going to go back to him in a second. The figure also comes included with a pair of swords. They're not so much the pair of matching swords, as you can see that one blade is a little longer than the other. In both the cases though, if you're looking at them, they actually have snake heads. Can you see that? Snake heads on the ends of the handles. Really, really cool the way they've done that. Granted, it doesn't have any paint, but I don't think in a case like this, Storm Shadow is generally known for having a black and white suit. Usually a white suit with black straps and all that. So I don't mind the fact that he doesn't have any additional color added to the handles of the blades. He doesn't have any guards either. Strange. It's just a very narrow sword. Long blades, although the one on the bottom is longer than the one obviously on the top, using kind of a more of a dark gunmetal gray. We're going to go ahead and take those. Now, you can either fit them, obviously, into his hands. I'm not really sure how I will end up displaying Storm Shadow myself. You can either, like I said, do the sword trick, or you can also have the figure displayed also with his crossbow. Bow and arrow, not a crossbow. But you can also take the swords, And obviously, when you're looking at the back of them, you'll know that one scabbard is longer than the other. So you sort of have to match things up and making sure that you're putting the right sword in the right place. You could put the longer sword in the shorter one. Actually, that is the shorter of the two. That would go in there. But you could take the longer sword. It's just going to stick out the bottom a little bit. At least there are slots on the bottom of the scabbards. So even if you do put the wrong one in, the wrong sword in the wrong place, like for example, this one fits in perfectly, take the smaller of the two, that's going to go right next to it. But yeah, if you do make the mistake and you put the wrong one in, maybe somebody's watching you doing it, like right now, everybody's watching me doing this. At least they did put slots in the bottom of it. So yeah, if anything, the blades are just going to stick out a little bit. So he already has those things as things that he can have both displayed on the figure or displayed in the figure's hands. The other thing the figure also comes included with is his bow. Now this goes back to the G.I. Joe Real American Hero Storm Shadow, now who was part of the Joe team, who had the hood and had the notable markings also on his white suit, came with a bow similar to this. In fact, very similar, in fact. It's all molded here then in black plastic, but it does have still the matching markings of the burgundy red, the same colors that they use for the feathers on the arrow and the Arashikage logo. You can also then take, I mean, you have to, of course, put these into his hands first. Just take the crossbow, fit this in between his fingers. Now, his fingers at least are soft enough plastic, so you don't really have to heat them necessarily. Just plug in the one side, like that. I'm just going to rush this right now, so bear with me. You probably could do a lot better of a job than I could. We're just going to take the feather, and the feather actually slots in between the finger, or at least the pointer finger, and the rest of the fingers next to it. And then you sort of have to just kind of twist this around. You can actually have him looking as if he's pulling back. And the only thing that misses at least its mark, so to speak, is the fact you can't take the strings and pull them back and match them and pull them into his actual fingers. So you sort of have to then line everything up somewhat as best you can get it. And it looks like Storm Shadow's about to fire his bow, even though, yeah, the strings are still going to be molded plastic. There's that option. Or like I said, you can also take the arrow and fit that into the back of his quiver. The last thing the figure comes included with may involve me actually having to take all the things that I just finished talking about. We're going to take that right off just because I know it's going to get in the way of things. Sort of a throwback to that mentioned Storm Shadow from G.I. Joe. He comes also included with a hood. The hood goes this way, by the way. I'm sure at some point the fact that we have this Storm Shadow and the fact that we have a hood that goes on top of Storm Shadow's head, have some speculation to believe that at some point Hasbro is probably going to release the Joe version of Storm Shadow. It's going to have the markings all over his suit and equal matching cross stitches of black also on his hood as well. Now what you can do, just take the head off. He does also technically have this collar piece too. Let me just hold that thought for a second. I'm going to pop the head off first from the ball joint. There we go. You could technically leave this off too. So if you did want to have something, I think, more closer to the cartoon, you could technically pop the head back in. And like I said, just leave that collar piece off. I actually am considering the idea of just leaving it off completely. But for the sake of this, what we are going to do is we're going to put the hood back in. And sort of what you have to do is you have to take his head and fit that into the hood and then line everything up and snap it back into place. Just like that. That's what Storm Shadow looks like with the hood on his head. And it's fine. It's good. It looks nice on the figure. But I think I'm still more leaning to the idea of this guy having no hood, just the way he looks like in the cartoon. But there's that option also as well if you want. Okay, so we're going to pop that back off. Root back in and pull out the head in there just to get that back out. Like, it's a softer plastic, but they didn't put any slit or anything in this, so you can't open it up. And the probably reason why they did that, so the hood would stay closer together, right? Because obviously if they put a slit right there, it probably would just be open at the bottom, and after a while it would just look a little too loose. I am leaving off this part of his collar. I'm just going to leave it off for the time being because I actually like the look of it more so without it. Getting, though, a closer look at Storm Shadow, nice looking figure. Again, like the Spirit we looked at earlier, is an oversized version, really, of the way he looked in the Real American Hero toy line back in the 80s. So, like, really very familiar looking design of Storm Shadow. The ripped, torn sleeves, they're actually ripped. I do like the way they've sculpted that in instead of just making a seamless, well, I guess, cut off line, very clean on the end of it. They at least actually made it slightly frayed. You see right there. The bandolier is a separate piece, so it is going to be moving around a little bit on you. You could actually technically take it off if you want to, but that, I think rather instead that finishes the look of Storm Shadow nicely. He does have a couple of shurikens down below here, neither of which can be removed. They're just molded as part of the bandolier. There's actually, they've added some additional paint there also on the buckle. His belt section, the part that we just finished actually adding that sash on before I started this video, is also a separate piece. The only thing about it, though, is being that it's a separate piece, it's prone to really moving around a lot. I haven't done it yet, but I'm sure I'm going to be doing it for the remainder of this video. As I'm moving the figure around, you might see me actually just doing this, just putting it back in place. I would love to really glue it, but I don't want to glue it either, and just in case it was something that really should stay free. I mean, like, it doesn't hinder necessarily the articulation on the waist if I technically was to glue it here. I really don't like to glue a figure unless I really have to. The thing about this part of his belt, or at least the lower half, I guess, of his gi, is the fact that this part right here clearly looks like it's a different paint. What they have likely done is they've taken the black plastic and painted it the white. Unfortunately, though, the plastic of the white below doesn't quite match the painted part that they did for the belt. So it is a little off. That's the only part that really is a little jarring when you're looking at the figure, because everything else is really a clean white. That's the only part that looks a little more messier, just because they would have had to paint over top of the black plastic. He does have the little gauntlets there also on the sides of his arms. He's got some additional gray on the inside of that as well, so it does nicely break up a little bit of that white. So if there's really a lot of white happening on this guy, at least he does have the color wash that's been added to the inside of his gauntlets. He actually has a little bit down below there where he's got the taped up bottoms of his boots. He also has the split in the middle there of his boots, or shoes there, and he does also have peg holes on the other side of his feet. The thing about these figures is, I may have even mentioned this before, but I really wish that these figures come included with display stands. I get the idea that it's more plastic. I also get the idea that it also could increase the price of these figures. But I think also if you're going to be displaying these figures in interesting poses than just doing literally what I'm doing right now, I think it would be nice, just nice if Hasbro could also include display stands with these figures as well. Talking now about the articulation for Storm Shadow, and I did want to also apologize. I feel like I didn't spend nearly enough time actually talking about how good the head sculpt is here on Storm Shadow. Although you can only really make out his eyes and his caterpillar-sized eyebrows, I think Hasbro has done a bang-up job of giving us a really accurate-looking Storm Shadow, at least from what we can see. He's always got angry-looking eyes, even in the cartoon. Storm Shadow always looked like he was annoyed. Even if he was just having regular conversations with people, he always looked ticked off. Anyways, though, articulation on Storm Shadow, his head is on a ball joint after all, so it does rotate all the way around. It can look down, it can look up, and it can also move back and forth as well, still all ticked off. The figure does have also a hinge joint or ball joint at the base of the neck, so that also adds some additional articulation, although it's so tight here on Storm Shadow that I find it's only really moving his head whenever I do this. I guess that's good because the neck isn't going to go along with it, but I almost feel like the figure didn't even need necessarily a neck articulation. I guess it does give him a longer or lower looking reach when it comes to his head. Also do the same thing with the head sculpt when you move it up, but I still don't think necessarily needed to put a ball joint at the base of the neck. He does have the shoulder joints, so you can bring those out beyond the point of a 90-degree angle bend. You can take the arms and rotate them all the way around. He does have a bicep swivel. He does have a double hinge on the elbow. And Storm Shadow also does have not only swiveling in his gauntlets, more to the way that they were assembled in the factory, but he does also have a swivel in his wrists. You can rotate them all the way around and hinge them slightly back and forth. The figure, I may have also just dropped his sash belt. I'm going to have to go and grab that. He does have a crunch in his abdomen. He does also have a waist swivel. Storm Shadow does also possess the leg joint, which is a little tighter on this figure here. You can see there's the ball joint on the inside. I always find, like with the thighs on these classified series figures, that they always seem a little more stubborn, reluctant to move at times. Sometimes you can get them to freely move. Other times it just seems like they're really hung up and they just don't want to budge for you. But yeah, you can pull off a ninja splits here with Storm Shadow. And then, of course, you're just going to bring those legs back up because it's going to leave a gap when you're doing that. 3/4 of the way up the thigh, the figure does have a thigh swivel. You can rotate that all the way around. The figure does have a double hinge on the knee. There's one. There's two. He does have a swivel. At this part of his boots, being the part that's taped off, that actually is a separate piece, so it does allow articulation there. Figure does have also foot articulation in the ankle. He does also have an ankle pivot as well. Nice looking Storm Shadow. Even though he is lacking right now the little sash on the back of his belt, I'm going to have to go retrieve that. I am freeing up a little bit of space here also as well. We can bring back in his nemesis, his rival, Spirit. Storm Shadow has been in many episodes of the original G.I. Joe Real American Hero series cartoon. The one that always stand out to me is the satellite episode, the one that crashes around like sort of a primitive human race, and they think of it as a god. I don't know why that's always the one that reminds me. Whenever I see Spirit and whenever I think of Storm Shadow, that's always the episode that comes to mind to me. But certainly when it comes to displaying these guys on the shelf, while many may lean more to the idea of displaying this guy with another Arashikage member, Snake Eyes, I'm much more leaning to the idea of displaying this with Spirits, two rivals that would appear frequently in the episodes or the cartoons of G.I. Joe. Because Hasbro did package this classified series Storm Shadow not only with a hood that he wears over top of his head and the same bow that he came included when he was part of the G.I. Joe team back in the 80s, I am convinced at some point this company is going to re-release this figure, which isn't a bad thing at all. They're going to re-release this figure, get as much out of the mold as they can, and they're going to give us the G.I. Joe or good version of Storm Shadow. That was the version of Storm Shadow I had as a kid. By the time I got into collecting G.I. Joes, I mean, when they first started G.I. Joes, I was really young. I was like only 5 or 6. By the time I was really into collecting G.I. Joes, that old Storm Shadow was long and gone. Unless you were lucky enough to maybe find it at a garage sale. No, what I had for Storm Shadow was the G.I. Joe Storm Shadow. Though in my world, that Storm Shadow periodically maybe changed sides, and every once in a while maybe he was joining the Cobra team. I always myself preferred to have Storm Shadow evil rather than good. I'm convinced, though, at some point we are going to be getting this figure re-released, and they're simply just going to be using that same hood. This hood and bow were probably a tease as to what they have planned in the pipeline for a future release of Storm Shadow. Interesting thing, though, about Storm Shadow, something I did mention or overlook to mention in this review, was the fact that his bow actually attaches onto the back of the quiver. You can probably see it right now. Just above the Arashikage logo, there's actually a little peg that sticks out. That actually slots the bow onto that. So you can actually house it onto the quiver if you aren't looking to display the figure with it. As for the purpose of displaying the figure, for the time being, I'm going to go without the hood myself. I just like the idea of displaying Storm Shadow without the hood and leave that idea of him wearing a hood, the eventual release I'm sure we're going to be getting, that G.I. Joe Storm Shadow. You know at some point it's going to happen. They already have the mold of the hood. They already have the mold of the bow. Not the crossbow, the regular bow. It's going to happen sooner or later. But what do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comment section. Would you display this Storm Shadow in his classic look without the hood, or would you display him with the hood? One thing I did do also here in final looks is I did put that collar piece back in. It does sort of fill in the neck a little bit and kind of fill it out so it doesn't just look like he's got a hood and then it goes right to a skinny neck. Probably isn't supposed to be there, but I'm just putting it there for the time being. It doesn't really matter. After this is finished recording, I'm just going to take it off anyways, and he's going to go without the hood, sans the hood. It's going to be displayed battling along with Spirit. A big thank you, though, to the folks over at Hasbro that did provide this sample of the G.I. Joe Classified Series Storm Shadow that we could have a look at in this video. For your video question for today, how do you prefer to have Storm Shadow? Do you like to have him bad and part of the Cobra team, or would you rather have him a G.I. Joe? Again, like I said, even though I had him as part of the Joe team, he was always betraying the Joes, going back to Cobra. And yet somehow the stupid Joes would always take him back. Storm Shadow would just realize, I guess, the error of his ways, and the Joes would just welcome him back just to be betrayed again. I was a savage when it came to G.I. Joes. Lots of G.I. Joe reviews, by the way, are going to be coming to this channel. Not only at the very end of this video will be popping up a playlist of all the other G.I. Joe Classified Series reviews that I have done over the last little while, but after the end of this video, there will be more G.I. Joe Classified Series reviews coming your way, so make sure you're coming back to this channel on a regular basis. You can do things like hitting the subscribe button down below. You can do things like turning on the bell notification, and most definitely you can do things like coming back on a regular basis. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.